Devil May Cry 4 is a mixed bag. As the fourth game in the series and the follow-up to one of the best games in the series, it needed to get a lot of things right to continue the momentum from 2005's Devil May Cry 3. And for the most part, it successfully does that, but not without flaw. After finishing Devil May Cry 3 recently and working my way through the series, I was curious to see if Devil May Cry 4 could take the successes of its predecessor and take it to the next level in smoke and stylish glory. So, what aspects of the game soar and where does it fall? Let's find out as we dive into the fourth part of a 6-part series where I document my experience with each Devil May Cry title. My name's Johnny Bueno and this is Faulty But Fun, a Devil May Cry 4 review. Devil May Cry 4 starts you off in the shoes of angsty newcomer Nero, who is a member of the Order of the Sword, a religious group that worships Sparta, the father of our pal Dante, who is a leading man in the previous 3 games. The game kicks off with a rather impressive cutscene that paints Dante almost as a villain as he seemingly kills the High Priest and makes his escape. Nero is tasked with hunting down Dante and later saving his girlfriend Kyrie from the clutches of evil. I think Devil May Cry 4's intro served as a great way to hook people into the game by positioning Dante as a bad guy at the start. Players are left wondering why the hell the protagonist we played as before decided to murder this nice churchman in cold blood and flee the scene. Obviously there's much more at play here, but I'll admit I was absolutely invested as I took the role of Nero on his mission to hunt down Dante. Nero himself is a totally fine protagonist. He's a little angsty along with a dash of cockiness akin to Dante, which makes him come off as both fresh and familiar. He's also got a neat demon arm giving him special abilities that only adds to his angst as he wrestles with the fact that he's seemingly different from the average human. Honestly, I thought I would dislike Nero, as it can be difficult to transition to a new main protagonist after playing as the same guy for the past 3 games. But I didn't mind him. Sure, his motives were pretty generic, like stop the bad guy and save the girl, but he did have a slight bit of charm to him, and he has pretty cool abilities to boot. Of course, I have to mention that you do get to play as Dante for a decent chunk of the game, even though for most of it you'll be slaying demons as Nero. So there is a 2-perspective story similar to Devil May Cry 2, although this time it's much better implemented in comparison with a few caveats which we'll get into later. From a setting standpoint, I really like what Devil May Cry 4 brought to the table, as I felt like it's the most varied and unique setting yet. We'll travel to places like a church-centric city, an icy castle, a dense lush forest, and an underground lab throughout the game. I thought this was an improvement over Devil May Cry 3, where most of the game takes place in similar areas with little variation. So this was a very welcome change from my perspective. My personal favorite was the Vatican City-inspired castle town. I felt like it was an interesting shift from the usual dark gothic towns we've gotten in previous Devil May Cry games, and I wish I could have stayed there longer than just the first few sections of the game. But I did love what I got to see of this bright, holy city. Overall game structure remains the same from the previous 3 titles. You play through the game in a mission-based structure, taking on levels 1 by 1 to earn a score based on how spicy your combos were, how many red orbs were collected, how fast you completed the level, and how many items were used. A main difference from previous titles is the implementation of Proud Souls. Unlike previous games where red orbs were the primary currency for both buying items and weapon upgrades, Proud Souls are now the primary currency for upgrades, and red orbs are now used to buy items. I'm not really sure why this change was implemented. I think having a single currency for both items and upgrades worked fine in previous games, as it made you balance temporary boosts and healing items with long-term boosts and upgraded skills, if you're good enough to utilize them appropriately. It was definitely a system that encouraged players to become more skilled at the game to the point where they don't need to use healing items anymore, but I suppose having separate currencies for both can be seen as more new player friendly. Devil May Cry 4 will take you through 20 total missions, the majority of which you'll play as Nero, but as I mentioned before, you do get to play as Dante a bit, and that bit is 7 of the 20 missions. And I want to point out that Dante's missions are actually one of the big flaws in the game despite the joy of letting you play as Dante. You see, he literally plays Nero's missions in reverse order. Yes, that it mostly includes the same bosses that Nero fights as well. This was where one of the major disappointments with Devil May Cry 4 hit me. It felt like this section of the game was incredibly bland as there are so few differentiating points in Dante's missions compared to Nero's. Don't get me wrong, I was ecstatic to play as Dante again, and his style of combat is incredibly in-depth, which we'll get into later, but the fact that I was just doing the same missions over again made me feel like the latter portion of the game was obviously rushed. Nero's missions are all well and good, and I thoroughly enjoyed them the first time through, but Dante's backwards rehash of the same levels didn't quite give me the experience I was hoping for, and honestly it didn't do Dante justice as well. Speaking of feeling like the game was rushed, this came up again towards the end of the game where they reused the same dice minigame that was present in Mission 6. You essentially roll a singular die, and the number it lands on is how many spaces Nero's statue moves on the board, with the goal of getting to the end of the board. This was fine the first time in Mission 6, but it looks so lazy that they reused the same exact minigame in the lead up to the final boss of all places, and you had to do this several times over as you worked your way up the level, fighting previous bosses between each board. They were clearly trying to bring back the boss rush from the end of Devil May Cry 3, but it really felt like they ran out of time when implementing this, as they just slapped the dice game over it and called it a day. This left the run up to the final boss feeling extremely anticlimactic and honestly frustrating, because it's not like the dice game is challenging, it's just time consuming and repetitive. But enough with the negativity, because I did love how many playable characters Devil May Cry 4 gives you. Nero and Dante are the leading men, but you can also play as Lady, Trish, and of course Virgil from previous titles, each with their own unique style of combat that just blew me away. Unfortunately, they do go through the same exact story missions as Nero, but I didn't mind this as much, as these characters are more like bonus content, giving you an opportunity to play as prominent characters from the series. I have to admit it was refreshing to jump into the Bloody Palace though after completing the game for the first time, and mindlessly blowing up enemies with Lady's signature rocket launcher. Combat has seen a significant upgrade from Devil May Cry 3, which already had a lot of complexities in its own right. You can still launch enemies, juggle them in the air, rush them down, and spray them with bullets, but each playable character brings their own unique twist to the mix. As someone who's still somewhat new to the series, Nero was very satisfying to play and felt like the easiest among the characters to achieve a high style score, which grades how unique your combos are. On the surface, he is very new player friendly thanks to his Devil Buster mechanic, which essentially lets you pull enemies toward you, or you to them in some cases, and perform grab style attacks with his special blue arm for heavy damage. Nero also has the Exceed mechanic, which lets you literally rev up his sword for greater damage and more explosive moves. I personally wasn't too great at remembering to use it, and made it through the game just fine without using it very often, though I can see it being much more of a necessary mechanic to optimize Nero's damage when playing on higher difficulties. Overall, Nero feels incredibly smooth to play and serves as a great intro character if this is your very first Devil May Cry game. I actually felt a little jarred after swapping to Dante in the story, because I found myself missing Devil Buster and it took me some time to get used to not having it in my arsenal. But that's okay, because Dante is absolutely ridiculous in his own right. If Nero's skill ceiling is the literal ceiling, Dante's skill ceiling is somewhere in the stratosphere, because there's so much they can do to dispatch enemies. He can swap melee and range weapons just like in previous games, but a big difference is that he can also swap between 4 and eventually 5 total styles that were seen in Devil May Cry 3. This leads to a staggering number of combos when factoring in both weapon and style swapping, and anyone who can take full advantage of Dante's kit has my utmost admiration. This did actually encourage me to try out other styles as Dante, as when I played Devil May Cry 3 for the first time, I played through nearly the entire game using his quick dodging trickster style. I found myself still doing this in Devil May Cry 4, but I also spent just as much time optimizing my combos in Swordmaster to maximize damage. The fact that styles can be swapped on the fly made it much easier to test out my chops with each style, even if some of them didn't quite click with me. The 3 bonus characters each have their own quirks as well. Virgil's quirk is that he's insanely OP. I'm not ashamed to admit I had no idea what I was doing in the time I spent testing out Virgil, but I was still devastating enemies with ease. I also really like that he gets to use the same weapons that he had in Devil May Cry 3, which makes his gameplay somewhat familiar, but with more than enough added flair to make him feel like a powered up version of his old self. Lady has an arsenal of range weapons to blow up foes and a glorious explosion of missiles and grenades. Even what would normally be the devil trigger button for other characters has Lady obliterating everything around her with a string of explosives. Playing Lady really spoke to the part of my brain that just wants to watch demons blow up, and I absolutely loved it. Trish, the leading lady from Devil May Cry 1, feels insane to play as she utilizes lightning-infused strikes with her hands and feet, along with the extremely powerful Sparta Devil Arm. She's able to throw out Sparta to spin on enemies while she does some sort of lightning breakdance to cause massive damage. I had no idea what was happening half the time when I played as Trish, but it felt incredible to lock down and punish enemies with their fast, chaotic playstyle. Much like the game itself, Devil May Cry 4's enemies are a mixed bag. There's usually some sort of gimmick you need to exploit to defeat them, a lot like in Devil May Cry 3, but exploiting their weakness can come with varying levels of frustration. Starting with a good example of enemy design, I think is the shadowy Mephisto enemies. They can hover and shoot spikes at you, but they have a clear gimmick where their shadowy cloak can be dissipated by blasting them with range weapons. This drops them to the floor, allowing you to freely combo them with no retaliation. Another good design is the Armored Knight enemies. If you're aggressive enough, you can break their shield that they like to hold up a little too often and go nuts on them. They're also vulnerable from behind and turn very slowly, so it's easy to get to their weak spot. While the design is good, one of my gripes is that I felt like these armored boys are encountered way too much in the game, especially toward the end of Nero's missions where it seemed like I wasn't seeing any other type of enemy. This does lead into another negative point of Devil May Cry 4, the lack of enemy variety. Combat encounters started getting a little stale as I progressed through the game, as I was seeing these same enemies over and over again. So many fights consisted of Scarecrows and Armored Knights, or Scarecrows and Mephistos, or Scarecrows and those lizard dudes. I get that the Scarecrows are basic enemies meant to serve as fodder to boost your style score while distracting you from the more threatening enemies, but when there's even a lack of variety in those more threatening enemies, the formula gets boring really quick. Going back to specific enemy designs, this time on the more frustrating end, are the fish-like cutlasses. They swim through the ground and can't be harmed when doing so you need to time Nero's Devil Buster just right when they jump out of the ground to make them vulnerable. This is twice as frustrating when you're playing as Dante, as you don't have access to Devil Buster, so it's twice as difficult to force them into a vulnerable state. This, along with the absolutely ridiculous Blitz enemy, made me realize that some of Devil May Cry 4's enemies were seemingly designed around being exploited by Nero's Devil Buster. While Dante has many tools in his arsenal, it did feel like there was certain encounters that he just wasn't properly equipped to handle, and though I usually came out on top, I was left scratching my head wondering what I was expected to do beyond simple brute force. Moving on to the bosses, for the most part I actually really liked what I saw in Devil May Cry 4. I found each boss very unique from one another, both in how they needed to be defeated and their overall design. One of the game's first bosses, Burial, serves as a great entry point on how to fight against the game's larger bosses. Focusing on their head is usually your best bet, but you'll need to stay on your toes as the fight progresses as they start to throw new moves into the mix. I also loved how you're rewarded for your aggression in boss fights. If you're able to optimize your combos and dish out enough damage in a short amount of time, you can put the boss in a stagger state where you're free to continue wailing on them without any worry of counterattack. This is something that skilled players of the series can easily take advantage of, and I found it incredibly fun to figure out which combos can drop bosses to their knees the quickest. Also, I have to shout out the fight with Credo, which is easily one of the best fights in the entire game. I mentioned this in my previous videos, but my favorite boss fights in the series have been the duel-style fights between two warriors, and this fight more than delivered on that for me personally. This fight was amazing as Credo can easily counter your strikes, but you can also counter a lot of his strikes as well. This back and forth made the fight feel a lot like a dance, and it kept me on my toes throughout the entire encounter as he cranked up his aggressiveness the more I chipped away at his health. It was incredibly well designed, and I hope to see more fights like this in future titles. Like with previous games, I think it's best to wrap up this video by summing up the main positive points of Devil May Cry 4 and where it fell short. For the positives, I felt like Nero was a likable newcomer to the series and served as a decent frenemy to Dante, giving the game a nice dynamic between the two main characters. Combat saw a big improvement from Devil May Cry 3 as it's balanced pretty well between the new player-friendly Nero and the mind-bogglingly complex Dante. The bonus characters in Virgil, Trish, and Lady are a blast to play, even if they go through the same exact missions as Nero and Dante. There was a nice variation in the game's setting. You'll visit unique areas from a frozen castle to lush forest ruins. Most of the bosses were a blast to play against, and I had a great time figuring out their movesets to know when I can be aggressive and when I need to back off. And of course, the music still goes hard. For the negatives, the latter half of the game felt rushed, and Dante's missions suffered because of that. Backtracking through Nero's missions as Dante felt like a slap in the face to the Son of Sparta. The reused dice game was also a huge offender, as it felt like it was lazily slapped onto the final areas, making the lead up to the final boss lackluster. There was seemingly less enemy variety compared to Devil May Cry 3, it felt like I was encountering the same enemies on repeat, especially the armored knights. And some common encounters felt like they were designed around Nero's Devil Buster, leaving Dante feeling unequipped to handle certain enemies. Devil May Cry 4 is a very fun game, but it's also a faulty game. For every strong point the game had, it also felt like there was a weak point holding it back. I did genuinely enjoy my time with this game, and I think it had the best iteration of Devil May Cry's signature combat yet, but the latter portion of the game felt incredibly rushed and left the game ending on a fairly flat note. Fortunately, the game has enough bonus content with the inclusion of Trish, Lady, and Virgil that it'll keep me coming back to test my prowess with each of these intricate characters. Now, with the fourth game in the series completed, I'm admittedly nervous to try what's next. Before taking on the most recent title in Devil May Cry 5, I plan to take on the series' divisive reboot known as DMC, Devil May Cry. Is it truly the failed reboot that it's made out to be? Will it have any redeeming qualities worthy of a Devil May Cry game? Let's find out next time as I attempt to answer those questions, and more. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and please let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm covering all 6 games in the Devil May Cry series and only have 2 games left, so subscribe if you want to see more, and thanks for watching.